The way we're going to do it is we're going to have a little bit of an overall discussion of Rage of the Abyss, where I mention some of the things that it brings to the format and what I think of some of the archetypes in the set, right? How does it impact the Fiendsmith engine with new cards being added to it? How does it change Snake Eyes, right? Because there is Snake Eye support in there, and some other honorable mentions as well. And then after that, I wanted to have a separate discussion about specifically Molcharmi Fubulos. The cards I'm using here from Rage of the Abyss are OCG cards. I hope that's not too distracting. If this ends up on YouTube, the editor will throw translated versions of it on the screen. But since I didn't have time to attend the pre-release last weekend, I only have access to these. And I have access to these thanks to one of the sponsors of the channel. So I want to give a quick shout out to Haul On Card Shop. Thanks for getting me access to these cards so I can show them off before the set drops and maybe even play test with them before I get my hands on the TCG cards. The first thing I want to talk about is the impact on the Fiendsmith engine from Rage of the Abyss, which has obviously already taken a hit in the TCG with the banning of Lacrima. You get two new cards in Rage of the Abyss, which are Lacrima the Scarlet Sorrow, which is always treated as a Fiendsmith card, and you have, I think in English it's called Fiendsmith Agnum Day, which is a new Link 3 Fiendsmith monster. Now, the most relevant out of these is Lacrima the Scarlet Sorrow. Basically, this card says if it's normal or special summoned, you get to send any Fiendsmith card from your deck to the graveyard, which is the most relevant effect. And during your opponent's turn, if it's in the graveyard, you can target a Fiendsmith Link monster in your graveyard, shuffle itself into the deck, and special summon the Link monster back. It's in line with the entire design of the Fiendsmith cards because it gives you like a bonus immediately and then some kind of grind game effect later on. The reason this card is good is because it lets you summon something off of Requiem, because Requiem does not have to summon Engraver. It can summon any Fiendsmith. It's just Engraver was the only one we had up until this point. The reason why this card, I think for us, is a little less relevant than it is for the OCG is because we have Necroquip Princess, which was basically the TCG's fix to a problem in Fiendsmith, where sometimes, let's say you open with Fiendsmith Tract, go through the Lurie into the Requiem, and then you would go Requiem effect to summon out the Fiendsmith Engraver, right? Here is where we have a problem because we can't get that Engraver into the graveyard to get the ability to summon it back and get multiple bodies to make sequence and stuff like that, right? So for the TCG, what we've been doing in the last couple of weeks is we're bringing back the Requiem as an equip spell here. We're equipping it to the Engraver, and then we send it to the graveyard to summon Necroquip, and now you can bring back the Engraver by shuffling back Requiem or Lurie, and now you have your rank 6 play or you have your sequence. In the OCG, they don't have this ability because this is a TCG exclusive card, so what they can do with the help of this card is you can tribute the Requiem to summon the Lacrima and then send an Engraver from the deck to the graveyard. And then you can shuffle back the Lurie to summon back the Engraver, and there you go. That's your Link 2 into sequence. If you start with Engraver, you would have 4 Light Fiends, but if you start with Tract specifically, you'll have 3 Light Fiends here, which is more than you have if you go through the Necroquip Princess. You can't make Desiree because you don't have 3 Light Fiends, you only have 2. Even in the TCG, I think this card is going to solve some problems for the Fiendsmith deck because it's going to make starting with Tract better, as well as just the general ability to save an extra deck space from the Necroquip Princess if you so want to. One of the biggest downsides of the Fiendsmith package that it takes up a lot of extra deck space, right? And the Necroquip Princess just being one other card you have to put in your extra deck. I can see people prioritizing a main deck slot over an extra deck slot for this because the Lacrima is not even a terrible draw because you can still normal summon it, use the effect to send a Fiendsmith from the deck to the graveyard, and then go into your Requiem. So like, it's not a terrible normal summon. Overall though, I think the impact of this card on the Fiendsmith decks is a little bit overrated. I think this card is good. I think this card will see some play. I think overall, if the Fiendsmith cards were on a scale of 8 before, now it's like maybe an 8.5. It's a solid option, but it's not going to really increase the power level of the Fiendsmith. Honestly, if anything, we're going to talk about this card later, but overall, if Fiendsmith before Rage of the Abyss was a 8, it probably loses more from this than it gains from this. And then we have Fiendsmith Agnum Day, which honestly, I've been talking mostly about this card because this card is barely relevant. This card is a Link 3 that says you can target any light non-Link Fiend monster in your graveyard. You summon it from the graveyard and then you equip this card from the field to it, which honestly, I thought about it, but I haven't really seen many uses for this card. One use case that I can think of, let's say you go sequence and summon out a Desiree. In this spot, in some decks, what people have been doing was just equip the sequence from the field to the Desiree to have the negates online. I think what you can do, if you want to use the extra deck slot for it, let's say you're going second into a board, you can link these two off into the Agnum Day. Then you can use the Desiree, shuffle back in the sequence to send a card from your opponent to the graveyard, and then you can use this to equip it to the Desiree. And now you have a Desiree that's equipped with Agnum Day, which is fine. But once again, Fiendsmith extra decks are already super tight, so I doubt that this card is going to find its way into Fiendsmith extra decks. So overall, the Fiendsmith support in this set is honestly not that good. This card is going to see some play. This card is not going to see much play, I think. But overall, Fiendsmiths are getting something in Rage of the Abyss, but not that much. Other cards that are obviously worth mentioning. Azamina is a new archetype that is part of the Diabellstar lore, and it's focusing on fusion summoning. They have 4 new fusion monsters. I'm going to tell you what all of them do, but for the most part, only 2 of them really matter. Excuse me, I don't know 100% what these are going to be called for the TCG, but like this one is Azamina Sol Erisicthon or something. It's a illusion level 6 fusion monster. They all need an illusion monster plus one other like type. This one requires a illusion and a fiend, so you can theoretically hard summon it in other decks, but they have their own unique way of summoning these fusions, which we'll get into in a moment. So this card says, if this card is fusion summoned, you can target a card on the field, send it to the graveyard. During each standby phase, you can target an Azamina or a Sinful Spoils card in your graveyard, add it to your hand. So overall, fine card, but obviously it's just removal, not much else, and it doesn't really see play in the OCG, so we're going to move over that one relatively quickly. This is a level 8, which actually quite matters because the level of these fusions dictates how hard they are to summon. This one is Azamina Mo Regina, and it says target an illusion monster in your graveyard, special summon it. When a Sinful Spoiler or Azamina card is activated, except Mo Regina, quick effect, you can target up to 2 cards on the field, destroy them. It is quite powerful, but I think this card doesn't see play at all in the OCG at the moment because it's just almost impossible to summon with the way this deck works. And then we have the 2 good ones, the 2 really good ones. Azamina Murcielago, they have some sort of bonus effect that I forgot about. It says like boosts your stuff by 500 or something. The key thing of this card is when it is summoned, it adds an Azamina or Sinful Spoils card from your deck to your hand. And what is a Sinful Spoils card? That's right, Wanted. So this card searches Wanted on summon, and that is the main purpose of this card. And this one, Azamina Ria Silvera, and it says when your opponent activates a card or effect, you contribute it to negate it. So not only do these cards search Wanted, but they also have an Omni Negate for hand trap interactions. Sacred Azamina is the fusion spell for this archetype, basically. They have another card that summons fusions, but it doesn't really see play. This one is the relevant one. And it's not hard once per turn. You can fusion summon multiple times with this, which is very important because in the standard Snake Eye combo, which I'll show you later, you use this card to summon the Searcher first, get your Wanted, then you get this card back from the graveyard and summon the Omni Negate. The way this card works is you summon an Azamina fusion monster by sending to the graveyard Sinful Spoils spell cards, and you have to send 1 Sinful Spoils card for every 4 levels a monster has. That's why this card is so hard to summon. You'd have to send 2 Sinful Spoils to the graveyard to summon it. For each of these, you have to send 1 Sinful Spoil to summon it. And it has a graveyard effect. If it's in the graveyard, you can target a Azamina fusion that's on your field or in your graveyard, put it back to the extra deck, and this card goes back to your hand. That's how you can use it multiple times. And then we have this card, which is probably, I mean, it's not the best card of the bunch, but it's the one that makes it all tick and glues it all together. This card is Sinful Spoils Deception. Technically not an Azamina card, but it searches Azamina cards because what it does is you tribute a monster to add any Azamina card from your deck to your hand. During the end phase, if this card's in your graveyard because it was sent there from the spell trap zone, you can set it. Yeah, okay. But it's not that important because the main part is obviously tribute a monster to add an Azamina card. So why don't we take a look at how this interacts with Snake Eyes? Because this is obviously the one that it goes the best into, which is unfortunate. I've said this before. In itself, I find these cards quite cool, actually. I have no beef with the Azamina cards, is what I'm trying to say. My issue personally is that why does it have the best synergy with Snake Eyes? Why didn't they make synergy cards with the other archetypes like White Forest and stuff like that? It's kind of mind-blowing to me. But anyways, here is how you can use these cards to access your Snake Eyes combo, because obviously now that Snake Eye Ash is limited and Snake Eye Poplar is limited, you lose some consistency in Snake Eyes, but you can actually use Sinful Spoils of Deceptions to replace those kind of consistency hits hits, and you can even use this card to even play around Nibiru. All it takes is Sinful Spoil's Deception plus a monster to tribute. Let's say you have a dead Moltrami Fuvalos in your hand because you're going first, you're not going to be able to use it. That's going to be a very common thing in the next format. So you're going to use Sinful Spoil's Deception, you're going to tribute Moltrami Fuvalos, and now you can add an Azamina card from your deck to your hand, which is going to add you Sacred Azamina. Now, Sacred Azamina is able to summon one of the level 6 fusion monsters here by sending one Sinful Spoils from the field to the graveyard, which is the Deception. And you're going to summon out Murcielago. Murcielago now adds you any Sinful Spoils from the deck to the hand. You're going to add Wanted, you're going to activate Wanted, and that's going to grab you the Diabel Star. And at this point, you can use the Wanted, put back the Sinful Spoils Deception because it is a Sinful Spoils, and draw a card. You're going to discard one for Diabel Star, and you're going to set your original Sinful Spoils. And you might think like, oh cool, we've gotten into the original Sinful Spoils. That's how we now access our Snake Eye combo and we're Gucci. But that's actually not what you do in this instance. What you do is you link these two off into any link 2 that you want to go into. In a lot of combo tutorials, people have been summoning the Moon of the Closed Heaven here to go into the Fiendsmith cards later, which you can do. I think it is not unlikely that people will choose to not play the Fiendsmith cards in Snake Eyes after Rage of the Abyss though, because you need extra deck space for the Azamina cards, and the Fiendsmith engine itself doesn't actually access your Snake Eye cards anymore. I can imagine people not playing this anymore and instead going for an IP Masquerena and then use it later in the combo to place it with Flamberge. What exactly you summon here doesn't really matter. It's not the point, right? The point is you make a link 2 here for now that you can make use of later. And now what you do is you use the Sacred Azamina in the graveyard, put back the Murcielago to add itself back to the hand. You can use this again to fuse because you don't have to send face up Sinful Spoils to the graveyard. You can send this original Sinful Spoils to the graveyard to fusion summon the Rhea Silvera, which can negate anything your opponent throws at you. And obviously, because we didn't use the first effect of Sinful Spoils Snake Eye, we can now banish it from the graveyard, put the Diabel Star from the graveyard back into the deck, and search Snake Eye Ash. Because guess what? We haven't done yet. That's right, we haven't normal summoned. So at this point, you've added Snake Eye Ash from your deck to the hand. You've also established any link 2 you want. It can be IP, it can be Closed Moon, it can be Silhouette Rabbit, whatever. And you have an Omni Negate. And now you're going to go into Snake Eye Ash, you're going to go into Poplar, you're going to go into Divine Temple. You know the drill, right? I don't have to show you what this is going to end up creating. This single-handedly is enough to make people play Snake Eye again, because that is an incredibly powerful opener, of course. The only quote-unquote good news is that it only really matters if you draw this card. It's just another broken starter for Snake Eyes. It is rough. There is counterplay to this. Like, yeah, Droll Lockbird is really powerful against this sort of combo. Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit is really good against this card as well, because you have to invest 2 cards. The main point about this card is that it solves 2 problems that Snake Eyes had after the last ban list. Number 1, Snake Eyes lost some starters. It has now regained some starters. Number 2, Snake Eye had some problems playing through certain hand traps, specifically in the Biru. Now that is no longer a problem because you have access to this, which is an Omni Negate for your combos. If I had to make a list of things that I wanted from Rage of the Abyss, increasing Snake Eyes consistency and increasing Snake Eyes resilience to hand traps, they were nowhere to be found on that list. That's unfortunate. The question that remains to be answered is, does this make Snake Eye better than Yubel? Which I think is questionable. And then we have a couple of other things to talk about. The good news to report is that the Yubel deck does not really receive anything, as far as I'm concerned, from Rage of the Abyss, outside of like maybe playing the Lacrima monster in the Fiendsmith package. But for the most part, Yubel doesn't receive anything from this, which is good. Here's another card that I wanted to bring up. Dominus Impulse. You're all familiar with Dominus Purge already, I hope. Now this card is an upgrade, a huge upgrade to Dominus Purge. What it does is when a card or effect is activated that includes an effect that special summons a monster, negate that effect. And if you have a trap card, you also destroy the card. So it's basically a solemn warning, roughly. If your opponent goes Requiem to summon from deck, you can negate that. If your opponent goes Ostinato, you can negate that. Your opponent goes Branded Fusion, you can negate that. Samsara de Lotus, negate that. It's a really, really, really good card. The downside, of course, is if you activate it from your hand, you are locked out of light, earth, and wind for the rest of this duel. No light for the rest of the game means no Fiendsmith. It also means no Nibiru. It also means no Effect Veiler. I think it is a relevant drawback, but there is some decks that are still going to want to use it. There's two very important attributes that you are not locked out of. Number one is fire, so you can still use your Tenpai deck pretty much entirely. You can consider using this card in Snake Eyes even, right? Like that could be one reason to play Snake Eye without Fiendsmith cards. I feel like you could play this in like Fire Kings. I guess you're locked out of Zelantis or something, but like that could be worth it, honestly. Also, one thing you have to consider is like you only have this drawback if you go second and you use it, right? Like if you go first, you can set it and then you actually don't have the drawback. Only having to skip on like a Zelantis line if you go second and draw this card could still be fine. Actually, no, it doesn't lock you out of Zelantis. Someone was yapping and I got caught yapping. That's Dominus Purge, yeah. Because I was about to say, this card also sees some play in the new Mermail deck. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that this card is so good that every deck that can play it will probably play it. Centur-Ion gets support. I'm a fan of Centur-Ion. You guys know this. They get a new level 8 synchro, which is quite powerful. It's a generic level 8 synchro. On summon, it adds an emblema card from deck or graveyard, and then you can destroy a card on both fields, which is super good because that means you can now search Emblema Oath, which in return means that if you ever enter a grind game against Centur-Ion, this card is now consistently going to draw one card every turn on your turn and on your opponent's turn. This card came out in info and it says if it's summoned and you have a Centur-Ion and emblema card in the graveyard, you can draw a card. The only problem with that used to be that you don't have a guaranteed emblema card because this was not searchable. Now this searches this, which means if you set up, you can always draw an extra card every single turn, which is really good for a Centur-Ion grind game. The main reason why I wanted to point out these Centur-Ion cards is because I think Centur-Ion is one of the better decks into both Molcharmies. It has a lower ceiling than other decks in the format. Like your Centur-Ion boards, even with this card, are not going to be as powerful as a Yubel board or a Snake Eye board, but your deck at least does not care if it gets Fubulos, right? Because you can still very much make very, very powerful or standard Centur-Ion boards with just one or two draws under Purulia or Fuburos. So like that's worth pointing out, I think. Just a quick word about two other decks that I get a lot of questions about: the Mermail deck and the 6 Samurai deck. The 6 Samurai support is solid, especially this one is really, really scary. On summon, it adds the 6 Samurai and it's a monster negate. You combine that with the old Shien, you now have a monster negate and a spell trap negate. I'm pretty sure 6 Samurai can set up some really nasty boards now, but from what I've seen, I personally don't feel like the 6 Samurai deck is going to be a top tier meta threat. I think it could end up being a solid rogue deck now with those cards, not much more than that. And unfortunately, I think the same is true for the new Mermail cards. Maybe a little bit better. I think it's going to be definitely like a tier 2 sort of thing. I haven't played it myself, but I've seen some Mermail games and it's usually just been like go first and win, go second and don't win. So if you can find a solution to that problem, then maybe it's fine. But other than that, I think Mermail is looking quite glass cannon-y in my opinion. And that's Rage of the Abyss in a nutshell. I know it's not everything about Rage of the Abyss, but I hope it's helpful. I think that is the most relevant stuff competitively. If you've been watching this on YouTube, let me know if I missed anything. Let me know if you think there's any sleeper gems in Rage of the Abyss. Of course, Molcharmy Fubulos is without a doubt the most impactful card in the set. I'm gonna have another YouTube video on this card specifically, on what kind of impact it has on the meta and how you would maybe adjust your deck building to it and so on and so forth. That is going to be another video. That's going to be it for this discussion. Hope you enjoyed the YouTube video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the Molcharmy discussion. That's going to be uploaded soon. Thank you for watching.